Hi all, I have great pleasure to show you the following game, which I witnessed live as well with great pleasure. So Fritz, version 16.10, was playing against Leela. So Leela's ID is 11089. This is in the Chess.com Computer Championship Rapid Rumble, 15 minutes with a 5-second increment. So the game went like this. D4, knight f6. C4, the Nimzo-Indian. E6 is invited if white tries knight c3. I expected a queen's Indian, but in fact, we did get the Nimzo-Indian. Fritz was not too concerned. Now Leela did play bishop b4, and I've shown you games on the channel where she seems to have played the Nimzo better than Nimzovich himself in great style. Now this is the Rubinstein variation, e3, after Akiba Rubinstein. Black castles now, Leela castles, bishop d3, and I thought c5 was a viable option, but d5 is actually more popular in Chess-Based Livebook. So far Leela has played this to the book, basically the most popular choice in book, opening book. I'll give you an example of c5 though as well. It can transpose as well, d5 played anyway. This kind of thing has been seen a lot before. White's thought to have a small edge. But anyway, we have d5, and there's a different game plan here it seems. Leela takes on c4. She's trying to saddle white with the isolated queen's pawn. Quick c5 here. White castles, c takes d4. Now this maybe isn't strictly necessary. If knight bd7, this has been seen before, but taking on d4 eventually, same sort of thing, isolated queen's pawn can result. So c takes d4 here, e takes, and now let's move a6 with the intention of b5 and bishop b7, which would seem to be a comfortable lock and key over the d5 square, the blockade square of the isolated queen's pawn. And white's next move isn't the most popular try in livebook, knight e5. It does seem to have a clear design intention to it, a priority. I'll show you the most popular move is actually bishop g5, pinning this knight. For example, b5 allowed, this position is thought to be about even. It does on the surface seem comfortable, but there's pros and cons for both sides. Now knight e5 as played does seem to definitely be designed against knight c6, and in fact it has discouraged a lot of players from playing knight c6. It seems the most popular move in this position against knight e5 is b5. So Leela played something which fractures her pawns. Let me just quickly show you b5. It's sharp, and this has been played before in over the board chess. Queen f3 hitting the rook. Queen takes d4 undermining the knight. And this situation, there's bishop takes c3 now to win e2. This has all been seen before. And it's thought to be about even, but if you run it through top chess engines, actually it seems white gets an advantage. White is the exchange up for a pawn here. Knight d5 in a practical sense seems impressive, but white has a4 and even giving up this for bishop a3, and this actually leads, it seems, to a difficult position for white. Check my pinned comment for the analysis of that to take that further if you want, but it seems as though there's an advantage to be gained in that line in any case. So Leela chooses this knight c6, which is structurally very interesting, because at first sight it seems as though Leela is inviting, this backward c pawn on the semi-open file. Isn't that a liability pawn? Isn't this also potential liability, this fractured, a pawn, this isolates a pawn over here as well? But we've seen in a lot of Leela games, and I have to make a football metaphor again. It seems Leela is taking ideas from European football. Maybe before she was training, self-training, she watched a lot of football games and transferred concepts across, because the form pawn is like the goal hanger in European football. But sometimes another sort of internal rule of European football is that defenders, midfields, attacking players, the forwards, they're all in. They have to respect their position on the football field. They can't go away. The defenders can't go away attacking too much because it leaves the defence weak, right? So there's internal rules and policies as well of football. And Leela seems to have studied all of those and wants to distract some pieces later away from the king. You'll note that the knight, which has been used in a positional manner, the duality of that is that in a tactical manner, the knight has left h2 a bit vulnerable. A queen could come to h4. There's no protection of h4. And Leela, seems to be totally aware of all the tactical downsides, basically, of a missing knight here. Knight a4 seems, again, a positional tone to this. And it does go with this idea of fracturing the pawns to restrain c5. It does go complement positionally this idea, this fracturing idea, that now there should be restraint. However, in this position, maybe c5 can be permitted, and it might not be that damaging to allow it. For example, like this, it seems to be, this scenario, even this scenario, which looks very, very scary for white. So hitting g2, threatening mate and the knight. And then this tactic, this amazing tactic. So if king takes, we take the queen. This should be about even anyway, this position, because white's got the bishop pair. So that's allowing c5. It's not the end of the world necessarily to allow c5. So this move, it goes well with the knight e5. And it's just as if white is a good positional player. You might not have thought Fritz is a computer by the tone of this game. It seems as though black's, you might think, a younger player, not worried about pawn structure at this point. And we have knight d5 though, which is simply a natural logical antidote, because that is a weakness in the last move, that d5 is now available. And also this queen h4, which is, again, there's a missing knight on f3. So can the queen actually tempt some weaknesses? If the queen tempts g3, then we can get a dreaded form pawn, i.e. a goal hanger later. So in terms of European football again, we want to get a goal hanger and we want to get the defenders out of their key positions. So how do we do that here? Well, queen d3 is played. Let's have a look. Knight c5, this position should be about even. If the pawn's permitted to go to a4, it's not such a liability there, it seems. So anyway, queen d3. So this knight is blockading that pawn, basically. We have a5, but the knight is fixing that pawn on a5 for the moment. Rook d1, and now the queen does come into h4. It's a nuisance. Queen e2. Yeah, if g3, then queen h5 is quite comfortable for black. So queen e2, rook e8. Now at this point, it does seem as though, hold on a sec, this bishop is also an issue. So we've got three issues. This bishop blocked in, these weak pawns, and that is certainly more seemingly exploitable than this, because it's really on a semi-open file. Anyway, we have g3, queen f6, bishop d2, preparing at some point to put pressure on c6. The bishop drops back. On e5 here, bishop takes. This variation is very, very tactical. You can see the back row is exploited. Very tactical variation, but it should be an even position, by the way. E5, although tempting to liberate the bishop, yeah, it does run into tactics. And unlike normal over-the-board human games, these tactics would actually be played out. They're not just fictional, these variations. They're more closer to actually what would be played out by both of these high-level engines, basically. So bishop f8. And then we have queen e5. Leela doesn't want the queens exchanged off just yet. Rook ac1. So it looks as though white's playing like a good student. As Korchnoi said to Karpov once, the structural damage has been made, and now just target c6. Simple chess, surely. Simple structural exploitation. The bishop issue, though, is addressed here by Leela. Bishop a6. Now, I had thought for a moment maybe f6 could be justified in some situations, to play maybe e5 later. I don't think this works very well for black. It is weakening and committal. For example, like this, and maybe white can even fling in at some point h4. So this doesn't look too great for black. So we have this bishop a6. Okay, getting rid of one liability. Bishop takes, rook takes, and now queen e2 hitting the rook. And now Leela puts her rooks to protect each other, and c6. So it seems as though this looks, at this point, it looks a bit suspect. Now white's building on c6 here with rook c4 to double the rooks. It seems like a very natural plan. It seems a kind of waiting move it's played, bishop e7, just waiting for this doubling of rooks. And now h5. So this is intriguing now. What on earth is this about, just giving up c6, you might think. And in fact, king g2 was played here. First thing to note, basic thing to note, h4, this bishop takes h4, which justifies the bishop being on e7 actually. So it wasn't just a waiting move. Waiting move with purpose. Rules out h4. And actually, we could follow this line just to clarify a bit further. If knight c5 to try and pounce on this weakness of the last move, the bishop can return back, and black should be quite nicely set here. This is a nice small edge for black. So king g2 was played. On rook takes c6, you might be wondering. There's a snag here with the back row. Look at this. Check. Yeah, this is why perhaps king g2 was played. Because snagging the a2 pawn. I picked up the word snagging, by the way, from J. Chess. I thought it was a cute word to use sometimes for snagging a pawn. Anyway, please excuse that. So h5. So king g2 is played. You'll note, by the way, the bishop has to stand guard on f4 here, otherwise there's knight f4 check. Slight downer to king g2, which means bishop b4 has more punch than usual. Anytime bishop takes, we have knight f4 check. Bear that in mind. Okay, so we have rook d8 here. So now not only is this rook loose, what about the pawn here? The pawn in this situation? There's no check even. Why is this working? Let's have a look. White didn't actually play rook takes c6. It seems the logical culmination of White's positional play, starting from knight e5 takes, double on c6. Karpov would be proud, right? Good student. Why isn't this working? Because things happen with king safety, h4, and this is nasty actually. This position here. Look at this. Even though a5 is even hanging, well, knight f4 as mentioned. Forget a5. If we look at this position, rook c4, bishop b4 to try and distract the bishop. Here, it seems black, because this knight's misplaced as well. Black seems to be in great shape here. Here, for example, this is just one example. With bishop takes c3, and now again, not here because of knight f4 check. B takes, and even though technically white is a pawn up, look at this position. It should be even because there's a really active rook. This rook's basically misplaced there on c4. It's caught in a misplaced situation. This can lead to a black having a big advantage, this kind of infiltration, ultimately. So it seems, weirdly, that, perhaps weirdly you might think, that c6 is not very tempting here, and Fritz decides on knight c5. But things get even weirder here from a structural exploitation perspective. And this shocked me during the stream, and probably many others, I believe. Because after bishop takes, you'd think, what was the point of all of White's play if White's now going to take with a d-pawn? What was the point? White's doubled the rooks. What was the point? All wasted intent. Why not take with a rook? What was the problem with taking the rook? And also that hits that rook, by the way. So the rook moves. This is an example. It seems this scenario, whatever way this position is sliced, white's a pawn up, but whatever way it's sliced, believe me, I've tried slicing this position in many different ways. Let's have a look at some of them. Rook takes c6, rook takes b2 is too dangerous because now we've got knight f4 check again. So say a4, knight f4, just winning the queen. That's too dangerous, this position. So let's say you might want to try... So you might want to try b3, right? It turns out a4 is pretty nifty. For example, taking here, take on b3, this position, then we can take on d4 with that isolated pawn. And you might think this, but it's countered by this. Because if this, then there's that. Forking king and queen. So this position, there's a4 dissolving the a pawn weakness, it seems. And if it takes, then there's rook b2 again with knight f4 introduced. If king moves, again, knight f4 is strong anyway. Because here, check, taking on f2 is strong because now the whole d file collapses in this variation with that pinned piece. And this is just murderous. This rook and pawn ending is not just bad for white, it's totally lost. Because there's a threat of like a mating net here building up. And this leads to just a totally lost position. So there's all sorts of strange happenings which cause this perversely unintuitive move, which confused me greatly. All these efforts, starting with that innovation knight e5, seem to have all been in vain now. The c6 pawn shielded, and the knight as happy as a perched parrot. Rest in peace, Polly. I did actually lose Polly as well at some point in the last 2 years. It's been, okay, a tribute to Polly, the knight on d5. Polly was a green Amazon and was the life and soul of the kitchen on many occasions. But anyway, that's another story. So the knight's happy on d5. So rook a7, and we have b3. Okay, so b3, knight f6, and we have bishop c3 now. The knight goes back, and bishop e1, and now e5, very, very dangerous looking e5. So there's a lot of tactics going on here, and white wasn't tempted to take on e5. Very interesting position this. It looks as though, hang on, why can't white take this pawn? Very good question. King h1 was played, so if queen takes, there's actually a real backfire with rook e7. For a start, if queen d4, that's in the firing line of this rook. So there's knight e3 check picking up the queen, and that's very good for black. So let's imagine that leaves not c3 because knight takes, queen b2 or queen a1, queen b2. Black just doubles rooks and has an infiltration with rook e2 coming. So for example, bishop d2, there's rook e2 with the big threat of knight e3 check now, forking king and rook here. This position, black can even do better though than knight e3 with queen f6 hitting f2, and installing the Thorn pawn is my preference. There's another way of skinning this position. I'm not going to say cat. So this way is very amusing because the rook on h3 is misplaced and white's losing material there. Also, let's say a4 instead of moving the queen. Then knight f6, queen f5 hitting this poor rook, which is like kind of trapped. And now f2's on the fire. This position is actually lost because of queen d5. Yeah, it's a very bad scenario, check, winning the rook. There's a lot of very, very bad scenarios here, basically, which happen when the rooks double there. Just to go back, so very interesting stuff. So this position with rook e8, yeah, very dangerous. So we have queen b2 rook e8. Instead of bishop d2 as mentioned, just to give you another flavour of this particular position. So white's pawn up, let's say 2 pawns up, that's totally greedy. Attacking the queen this time, and knight e3 check is very good for black. If here actually we have bishop d2 here, this position with queen f6, h4, again, this is a real killer because of that form pawn. So we get the gist that basically this pawn on e5 is a poison pawn, yeah, because basically black doubles the rooks, goes into the 7th rank, pins this pawn, that causes all sorts of pain for white in a nutshell there. So we have king h1 instead. I can tell you though that here, what I can tell you is knight f4 is on the card. So if a4, knight f4 check, forking king and queen, so takes black's better. So king h1 was played. We have rook e8 now supporting officially that pawn. Rook e4, and now a4 is tempting here, but actually queen g5 hitting the rook was played. And also defending e5, so maybe a4 is not that tempting. Now, actually, I think I got that wrong, really. What was, when I was talking about a4, I was talking about here. Here, if a4 is played by white, then e4, this position looks as though it's building up quite nicely. Even if a5 is lost, b3 is lost. This is great for black. This is absolutely great. So, pardon me. So, rook e4, keeping a lock and key on e4 from black. Queen g5, protecting e5, hitting c1. Attacking the queen. Now, queen f5. King g1, and now knight f6. And this is a trademark Leela. This is back to football now. So all those thousands of football games Leela watched on TV before learning chess, it's about taking away the defenders away from the goal. Yeah, the less defenders out of position, it's like violating policy, if not the official rules of chess. Good football is being violated here. And yes, as we've seen, the a5 pawn is far left. The goal is like far left of the field, irrelevant to white's king safety, taking them really far out of the action. Siberia, as we sometimes call it. We have rook d7 being played. So the a pawn is left to be executed by, it seems, both pieces, either the rook or the bishop. Vengeance will be had by Leela, though, after this. We have bishop takes a5. I mean, as we've seen in some other games, maybe vengeance will be had. Yeah, you never know. So rook takes a5 was played. No, it wasn't played. Bishop takes a5 was played. Pardon me. Let's get my orientation back. If rook takes a5, then black can double on the d file, and we have this scenario, which looks very impressive for black and is actually extremely dangerous. This scenario here is a build-up of great attacking pressure, and even if some simplification occurs, this scenario is fantastic. Threatening queen e1 check. This scenario is actually fantastic for black. This is actually to black's big advantage. So taking rook takes a5 doesn't seem tempting, but Fritz actually did bishop takes a5. And actually we have now the infiltrating rook d3, which actually means that with knight d5, this bishop's going to be harassed away from c3. If the knight was there and the rook was behind, then there's no way of pushing the rook away from c3. But here, after bishop c3, we have knight d5 now. Being able to push that bishop away is valuable here. Also, by the way, it should be noted, if e4, if e4, bishop c3, this seems to be fine, because white is threatening to take on f6 and then cause either structural damage or win a pawn potentially in some lines. So rook d3, this is a very precise move order as you might expect. So bishop c3, knight d5, pushing the bishop. Now if the bishop went this way, then e4 with imminent e3 is very nasty looking. But also form pawn attack comes in, h4, h3, and that's dangerous for things that even like rook d2 and queen f3. Example here, rook d2, bang, and a form pawn goal hanger. We're gonna score a goal here, guys. You know, score goal. Okay, so this is really dangerous. Bishop d2 is played, e4, rook e1, rook e6, check, rook a4. Now h4, the form pawn's coming in the main line of the game. White's extra pawn is quite a long way, as they say, before the endgame comes the middle game. The gods gave us the middle game, as they say sometimes. So rook c4 was played here. Yeah, the bishop's hanging. You know, white can't. There's no way of tactically doing this. You know, if takes this way, then the queen's lost. So that's no good. And yeah, there's just no way of tactically doing this. This way just loses the bishop at the end of the day. As they say in Big Brother all the time, at the end of the day, and this and that. Okay. So anyway, so h4 is played. Rook c4. Yeah. On king h1, we see the power of the form pawn. Bang. This is just losing for white kind of immediately, nearly immediately. Threatening checkmate. If the white king tries to evacuate, e3, bang. Check and check, and now comes check and just winning. Basically, this is just hopeless. Okay, so there's very, very nice, beautiful variations. That was on king h1. King g2, we echo the same form pawn disaster. Check, and then e3. E takes, crushing, rook f3, pinning queen, winning. So we have rook c4 being played. No king move. King g8, rook a4, h3, form pawn. The form pawn is installed. So, as part of Leela watching lots of football games, goal hanging pawns, she discovered, could be useful in chess, as well as distracting key defenders away from the goal position, like this rook, you know, for this empty promise of the a pawn queening one day. A very empty, very long-term theoretical promise, which the vintage engines, shall we call them, or alpha beta engines, really delight in taking these pawns at the expense of king safety, it seems. So we have bishop c1. On rook c4, rook takes d2 is again killer form pawn after queen f3, threatening mate, and there's things like e3. This is just too much. So we have bishop c1, losing the exchange. Basically, it's just too much for white to bear. This position is too much tactically for white to bear. There's actually too much pressure in this position against white's king. You know, as mentioned, you know, form pawn is winning in some variations. Bang, check, and then mating. There's intense tactical pressure, and white just gives up, basically, the exchange by what is played. Because now there's a weakness of the last move, winning the exchange. Well, it's left to be won actually. There is technically there's a check, but it wasn't used. I believe that the queen has to stand guard over f3, because otherwise queen f3. The queen hasn't got d1 here, because the knight and the rook, among other things. So this is kind of crushing. So basically, the rook, it doesn't bother with the check. We have queen f1, just offering itself instead. It actually didn't bother with the check. So rook e8. This is now fragmented pawn time. What happens to fragmented pawns? They're easy to chop up later, fragmented pawns. They don't have the support of other fellow pawns. That's the problem with fragmented and isolated pawns in general. So this one's taken, and it's clearing up with an endgame form pawn, the exchange up. and past c-pawn, and more aggressive king, and pigs on the 7th. Rooks on the 7th, sometimes called pigs on the 7th. What more can black want from this endgame position? Seriously, the king just comes up, a la Capablanca. Rook's kept on the 7th, past pawn pushed. There's multiple ways of winning this. The squeeze is being put on. The bishop can't even take it, obviously, because of rook takes f2, so that g5 was a bit desperate. This is just completely gone, this position. Black could even play rook d2 here and be totally winning, for example like this, with the maneuver rook c1 coming. But Leela chose king c4. It's just a matter of technique, as they say. Now it's played, now it's chosen. That's ignored because of that similar variation. g3. Rook e2 is played here. c2, yeah, this is absolutely winning. Rook d1's coming. And it's played to the death under the tournament rules. It's played to the death. So we see a few more moves until the checkmate. I can only say, I hope I gave some justice to this game. There's an undertone of ruthless visual logic to this. I think form pawns are not just funny, they're lethal now. They have a duality, not just middle game but end game assets, as long as they're not liabilities in their own right. Structural damage over here can be used as bait, it seems, for key defensive pieces, which is also becoming another iconic theme of Leela, distracting pieces to win a-pawns at their demise when they do that. When they win an a-pawn, then it's like Leela goes into full attack mode, and it was marvellous to witness this in such a high-profile tournament game. So, because sometimes I felt that the fun games I'm showing are just fictional, would never happen with much greater hardware. Well, it's happening. It's real. The hype is real. The hype is definitely real. What do you think? Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.